Hello. Welcome to the 2018 Iowa City Book Festival, presented by Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. We would like to thank the sponsors who made this event possible: the City of Iowa, the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa City Arts Council, the Iowa City Public Library, Iowa Public Radio, the Graduate Hotel, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, Netson Construction, and Think Iowa City. Between events, be sure to visit the book fair at Merge on 136 South Dubuque Street, just behind the building here, where you can shop with artists, booksellers, publishers, and more. Author readings will happen throughout the day at the pop-up unit in the Ped Mall. Maybe, if the rain is nice. Between the library and Merge. Okay. The vast majority of book festival events are offered without charge, but they are not free. Your tax-deductible donation gives us the ability to offer programs like this festival. Please consider supporting the City of Literature by visiting www.iowacitofliterature.org/support. We encourage you to post about your experiences at the book festival on social media. When posting, feel free to tag us using hashtag ICBookFestival118. 18. Today we will hear from authors Chue Renteria, Sadagat Aliyeva, and Melissa Palma. Representing unique experiences from the border towns of Mexico, the mystical land of Azerbaijan, and the archipelago of Philippines, authors Chue Renteria, Sadagat Aliyeva, and Melissa Palma share stories from Iowa's first collection of bicultural stories. Reading followed by a Q&A from the series editor, Andrea Wilson of the Iowa Writers House. Please help me welcome our authors.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Wilson. I am the director of the Iowa Writers House. We are a literary center and community of writers here in Iowa City, the City of Literature, that's open and available to anyone who loves to write. And this year, we published our first book, and we're so happy. Thank you for braving the rain and the weather of all kinds and coming out to spend this special hour with us. It's a moment in time for us with this book. This is the first collection of stories written by immigrant, first-generation, and second-generation Iowans. And it's the result of a year of love and a year of labor by all of us up here. The journey started a little over a year ago when I made a decision. The Writers' House was primarily a place for workshops and education, but we had never done a fellowship. And I grew up in a town that was very multicultural called Columbus Junction, and I felt like the stories of that Iowa, the story of the Iowa I grew up in, wasn't being represented in the news, but also in literature. And Iowa is an incredible state, and we right now are becoming more diverse all of the time. And so the fellowship I created was called the Bicultural Iowa Writers Fellowship. I wrote a grant application to the State of Iowa Arts Council, and we received half the funding from them and fundraised the other half. And in that, we give an award to 3 fellows who get to spend a 6-month mentorship period working with the Writers' House and 3 writers' residencies at the house, where they come and train with some of Iowa City's best instructors, people who've gone to the Writers' Workshop, teach at the Iowa Nonfiction Program. This year, the mentors were Maggie Conroy, who's the wife of the late Frank Conroy, who was the director of the Writers' Workshop for many years, Alicia Jetalo, who was an editor for the Iowa Review, and Jennifer Fawcett, who is a playwright and who produced a number of shows that were on at the Englert and at Riverside. So together, we poured out our hearts and our souls, and when I say we, I really mean these 3 people here beside me. Chue Renteria is from West Liberty, Iowa originally. He's of Mexican-American descent, and his parents both came from border towns in Mexico. He was one of our very first applicants. He also works at Hansher, which many of you know, doing continuing education there. Chewy was an artist ready to bring his voice to the world, and in his stories today, you're going to hear what it has been to grow up in bicultural Iowa, and what's positive and what's negative. And that's an important part of this book, is it shows both sides of that experience. It also shows both sides of that experience to both all kinds of cultures. We have translated all of the stories into the original languages of their cultures. Excuse me, one story per section. So what's been really beautiful is that as these fellows have done hometown readings, folks of their culture who maybe aren't as comfortable reading in English have been able to buy the book and read it in their native language. So the message, the story, is really being shared across cultures, which I think is really the true bicultural experience, and West Liberty has been one of the most beautiful examples of that, as Chewy's community has come out and supported him. One of his readings was at Puebla Restaurant in West Liberty in July, and he packed the house with people, and it was really a beautiful thing. Our second author is Sadagat Aliyeva. Sadagat immigrated from Azerbaijan 13 years ago. She was a playwright there, and was a very active person in the arts, but made a decision to come to the United States and found her place in Des Moines, Iowa. And today she's a mother of wonderful children and a librarian at the Clive Library. And Sadagat had a voice ready to come out, but there wasn't an opportunity for her to share that voice in writing. When she found the fellowship, she applied, and one of the things we discovered after we awarded her was that she's not only a writer, but an illustrator. And so for those of you who may want to purchase the book, it'll be available after the reading today, and they'll be doing a signing at Merge, which is just right across the way. But on top of the translations, the book also has a number of Sadagat's original illustrations. And we really hope that this fellowship is a platform for people to begin their careers, and Sadagat's illustrating and writing career has really begun in a beautiful way, as the Iowa Illustrating organization has supported her and seen what she's doing. So we're so excited for that. Our third author is Melissa Palma. Melissa is a graduate of the University of Iowa Medical School, and during her application for the fellowship, she let us know that it was a moment that she was applying for jobs and was looking for her new place in the world, but was also ready to take her moment with her voice as a Filipino American. She grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, with a multi-generational family. Her parents and sister have come to the readings, and they're incredible people with so much passion for the Filipino culture. And they brought food to the launch reading this June, and things, little umbrellas and everything. I mean, it was incredible. And her mom has been a real advocate in Waterloo for the book, and continued to, be one of the voices in the community for what it means to represent bicultural literature. And Melissa's just recently been awarded a very important fellowship, I believe, from the Filipino Embassy in Washington, D.C. Can you tell me what the name of that is?
Yeah, so it's called PhilPro, Filipino Young Professional Organization, and essentially it is the top achieving Filipino Americans in the United States. They awarded 10 awards from different all throughout the country, and so we'll actually be traveling to the Philippines this November to meet with different state delegates, meet with people in business, people in culture, and just have cross-cultural exchanges and come back and do a legacy project. So I'm hoping to incorporate my writing into that as well.
An incredible opportunity, and something we're so proud of her about, and also just proud that the fellowship can be associated with all of these incredible people. Chewy has received an opportunity also to do a book proposal for the University of Iowa Press. So people going on to be published, people winning international awards, and being really embraced by the entire Iowa literary community, all because of the wonderful people that they are, and because of the platform that the fellowship gave them, and because of the work they've done in this book. So a little bit of background for all of you. I'm going to turn it over to them, but first I'm going to read the foreword of the book, which hopefully will set the tone for what we hoped to share across Iowa about this book. Iowa has long been home to people of many lands, from indigenous peoples, including our namesake, the Iowa, to European settlers making their way to the west, to new populations arriving from Latin America, Southeast Asia, West Africa, and beyond today. Whether they came from for the promise of agricultural work or picturesque family life, for a fresh start and a better life for a new generation, all have become a fabric for our state, interweaving to form a vivid tapestry of diverse cultures that make up what is now known as Iowa. While often overlooked as a flyover state, our fields of opportunity are quietly housing the dreams of residents from all backgrounds as we continue to evolve what it means to be of this place. The Bicultural Iowa Writers Fellowship was created to bring light to the writing of Iowans who are both of this place and of another. It is the only program of its kind in the state, a fully funded residency that provides the training and platform of telling these essential stories. The program's inaugural fellows are individuals as artists and as people, but they all have one thing in common. They call Iowa home. Each artist uses genres that match their talents most naturally. Chuy Renteria found his voice expressed in essay and short fiction. Melissa Palma chose a combination of poetry, fiction, and essays. And Sadagat Aliyeva gifts us not only of her mystical fables, but also with a talent in illustration unlike any we've seen yet. This collection represents their unique experiences and an amalgamation of influences, from the coast of Azerbaijan to the border towns of Mexico to the archipelago of the Philippines. All are now firmly rooted here in our heartland. In these times, it may be easy to fall back on divisions, to see the self and the other. But these stories in this book remind us that the experiences of being human are grounded in universal truths, truths that we share, truths of life, of liberty, of the pursuit of happiness, and the founding ideals of this nation. We hope this collection encourages all of us to ensure these unalienable rights are extended to everyone. And now I present to you our fellows.
Hello. So here's my artist statement. I grew up believing that my life was a conduit to making art. My small hometown of West Liberty, Iowa, nurtured that belief, where cultures of people coexisted as litmus tests for America at large, where Mexican and Laotian immigrants intermingled with small-town Midwestern values. I learned to draw before I could walk, started my 20-year dance career before learning how to drive, began writing before I realized how important my perspective was to the collective. I've always wanted to use these forms to describe how it feels to be who I am, to document the passion of the people around me, to champion vibrant, messy cultural experiences not reflected in popular culture. Ultimately, I want my output to represent visceral humanness, prose describing awkward cross-cultural exchanges, ephemeral dances into the twilight of my career. I hope that people who experience my stories feel pangs of remembrance, that they see the root of our collective story. So I'm getting over an illness. That's not an excuse, I'm just saying. And I think I'm gonna throw a wrench into this. I usually do the beginning of the story. I wanna go a little bit further into it just because I think it's fun to kind of challenge yourself. So apologies if I kind of fumble up. I've never done this one live. It was the summer after the department store gig, after another year of community college. I hated going to that college. I was an average high school student and did not have the grades to get into the university proper. My good friends went to the University of Iowa, one on a wrestling scholarship, the other through sheer scholastic achievement. I looked at community college as an albatross from not taking things as seriously as I could have in high school, which is not to say I tried any harder at Kirkwood. It took me 4.5 years to get my 2 years associate's degree. One time, I caught my mom humble bragging to a neighbor that I had been going to college for X amount of years. To her, the more time you spent studying in college, the better. Doctors spend decades going to school, right? The neighbor and I didn't have the heart to tell my mom that a physician's course load wasn't the same as me flunking out of algebra a second time. So it was always good to finish up in the spring and get back to the hobbies and openness of summer. Close to the end of the semester, Charlie, one of Kirkwood's advisement staff, found me in the commons area. Charlie was one of the nicest people I've ever met. Tall guy with glasses who looked to always be on the precipice of a genuine smile. All you had to do was give him a reason. Tell him about your day or what career you wanted to work in, and he would pat your shoulder and break out into that smile. Charlie, in suit jackets with shoulder pads, would spend his lunch breaks in the commons area. He'd catch up with every student he could in that hour. He always remembered my name, even recently, after not seeing me for the better part of a decade. Turns out he used to call my high school track meets. He said, "How could I forget a name like Jesus?" Anyway, Charlie checked in with me at the Commons, asked how I was doing, and if I had any plans for the summer. I told him that I'd be chilling, but I usually try to find a summer job for some extra cash. Of course, gotta make some extra dough, right? Well, let me know how it goes. What adventures you get yourself into? Charlie said with a laugh as he slapped my shoulder. Charlie's inquiry into my summer plans was on my mind while I found the job listing online. All signs pointed it to being a sales associate position. I walked into the offices and realized too late that it was one of those weird pyramid schemes where they try to get you to sell knives to your friends and family. The first training meeting was them trying to convince us why we needed to buy the knife set ourselves to understand the product. We'd have to pay for the knives and training to use them, of course. I told my mom about this, and she laughed and told me what a crock it was. Their receptionist called every weekday for 3 weeks after the first interview. They were calling me, so you know it was a scheme. After finishing laughing, my mom got out that I should work roofing with my brother, Johnny. He was back in town from Texas and had a gig lined up. I should talk to him. The next morning, Johnny woke me up at 6 in the morning for my first day roofing. I still had sleep in my eyes as he drove his huge Ford F-150 down the highway. The house we were going to was about 45 minutes from our hometown of West Liberty. My brother is 10 years older than me, so at the time he was hitting 30, about the same age I am now. Man, I used to worship Johnny as a kid. He would drive me to school in his black Firebird, blast Rage Against the Machine as he pulled up to my middle school. I thought it was the coolest shit in the world. Zach de la Roca is another Mexican like us, caught in the middle. I never got the full story, but either Johnny or one of his friends crashed that Firebird, wasted. Johnny got caught with too many drugs in his apartment a couple years before our summer roofing together. He drove off to Odessa, Texas to work in the oil fields with my tios and keep a low profile. The high school football show, Friday Night Lights, takes place in a fictionalized Odessa, though my tios told us that all the Mexicans go to the poorer high school with a shitty football team. Anyway, Johnny got back for Christmas that year. The police pulled him over for having an out-of-state license plate. Then they saw he had a warrant for an arrest, and they threw him in the city jail for a couple months. I remember him walking through our door the evening he got out, glassy-eyed, with a scraggly beard he'd never had before or since. He was out now and stuck in Iowa, court case pending, looking for work. Him and I would find it together. That's not to say that he talked to me about any of this. Our family coexists between the cracks of discourse, pregnant pauses as we think of things less personal to say. Usually the less personal discussion is about the work ahead. As we drove along the highway, the conversations to that, as we drove along the highway, the conversation turned to that. Johnny said, "All right, so here's the deal. I met this guy, right? Big old white guy. He manages a couple teams, does roofing, siding, all that shit, right? His name's Joe. This guy used to be the real deal. Now he's lost in the sauce, too much drink. You'll see him, watch. He walks around like a chicken with his head cut off." I remember this phrase. I remember how it was the perfect encapsulation of Joe's being. "So here's our plan," Johnny continued. "While this guy is dicking around with his various crews, we go in and we do work. This guy Joe doesn't know how fast we can get this shit done. There's money here, and we can work it right and get it." My brother was laying out his game plan as if it was this nefarious scheme. I didn't get why doing the work better than Joe anticipated could be this underhanded thing, but I had never seen my brother work. When you work faster, harder, and smarter than anyone expects, there are ways to push past your superiors. When this work is something as unregulated as roofing and construction jobs, then you find ways to get paid that your drunken superior doesn't see. Get in with the homeowners, let Joe's old connections open the door for us, leave drunken Joe outside. Roofing, like most real tough jobs, is pretty simple. You can learn the gist of it. You can learn the gist of the entire process in a day. You can grab a person off the street and have them tear down old shingles with a 30-second demonstration, which is what Johnny taught me that first morning. Tear downs like this. You grab a pitchfork or a roofing shovel/shingle remover, you get on the roof, and you rip off the shingles from the bottom up. You got to push and scrape under the shingles to get underneath the nails. Then you leverage your shovel and pry the shingles off. When you get good at it, you can pry big chunks of shingles from the roof. You start at the bottom of the roof and work your way up. It's grunt work, necessary and taxing. After tearing off, you heave the chunks of debris onto a tarp or dumpster below. Finesse comes into play when you deal with the felt underneath the shingles. The layers of a roof From the most superficial to the deepest goes shingles, felt, then plywood. The felt is there to waterproof the house. If you rip into the old felt before you roll new felt on, this could be a problem, especially if you don't have any new rolls of felt at hand and there's a chance of rain that day. There's many a scolded grunt for being too careless when tearing down and ripping the felt up the shit. After tear down, you have to get the new shingles onto the roof. Other people use mechanical lifts to plop dozens of shingle bundles on a roof. We had to hoist the 80-pound bundles over our shoulders and climb the ladder ourselves. We made games of it. See who could ascend the ladder the smoothest, or who could carry the most bundles in a day. My brother taught me the basics on the roofs of a cookie-cutter condos in North Liberty. After a couple of weeks, we started to amass a squad of misfits to lay out Johnny's plan. I talked to my cousins, Tony and Mark, into joining us. Tony and Mark were both a year younger than me and dancers in my breaking crew. We three were inseparable that summer, so it made sense to get them to join us and make some money. Tony and Mark were cousins of mine, like almost everyone in West Liberty is your cousins. In other words, we weren't actually cousins. Hear me out. Somewhere in the family trees, one of my mom's tias is the half-sister to one of their dad's cousins, but by the white definition of the word, we were best friends who said we were cousins. It was easier to say so than to trace the mangled roots of our family trees. Tony and Mark were out of high school, always arguing or goofing off, and as clueless as I was to the real world. We were the bottom of the barrel grunts and too young to realize how much that actually sucked. One morning, on the caravan to pick everyone up, Johnny said that he was grabbing Malcolm, one of his old friends. When our F-150 pulled up to the condo in Iowa City to pick Malcolm up, Mark was the first to notice the familiar face. "Oh, hey, that's James Truth," Mark said as he got out to meet Malcolm/James. "Is that what he's going by nowadays?" Johnny asked as Tony followed Mark to give James some dap. James Truth was the rapper stage name of Malcolm, Johnny's old friend from his Iowa City days before the arrest. We knew James Truth from the hip-hop circuit. We were all part of a monthly hip-hop showcase. James would rap and our crew would break during the intermissions. James was dark, handsome, smooth-talking, and a pretty good performer. He fashioned himself after the rapper singers of the time, 50 Cent, The Game. "Doesn't matter what he goes by, as long as he can still hold it down with the nail gun," Johnny said before the trio piled into the truck. Turned out Malcolm could still work a nail gun and lay shingles down. Not as good as Johnny, but good enough to be an asset to the team. What separates the grunts from the skilled roofers is what happens after you're done tearing off and placing felt down. It's when you actually have to lay down new shingles. The skilled guys can place shingles down and secure them in place fast with a nail gun. You could tell how good a person was with a nail gun by the rhythm and pacing of the nails firing each shingle into place. Malcolm was good. His nail gun would beat at a steady pop, 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 before he took a beat to slap onto the next shingle and repeat the process. Johnny was a master. He would line up all the shingles in a row and smoothly shift to each one of his knees. Pop, 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 all along the roof. Johnny and Malcolm carried old foam couch cushions to rest their knees on while nail gunning. If you were fancy, you would get some knee pads, but we had to do with what we had. Johnny and Malcolm would reminisce about old days between nail gun shots. Tony, Mark, and I would wipe away sweat and dirt from our faces and talk about what new trouble we could get into during the weekends. We would all have calluses and bruises from lifting bundles up ladders, cuts and scrapes from bumping into nail and debris. The smell of tar and dust filled our nostrils as we worked in stifling heat. We would crack jokes at each other's expense and get paid on a semi-regular basis. It was getting close to Johnny's original plan. Drunken Joe would give us a new roofing job to do. We would get it finished close to or better than the estimated time and repeat. We would get paid in cash, of course. There were no W-2s, no insurance, and no taxes for the type of roofing we were doing. Paychecks were rolls of cash transferred from Joe's bank account to Johnny's hand. Johnny would then divvy up the sum to his team. I remember getting paid for the first time. I mean, paid. It wasn't like the paychecks at the grocery store, checks for $7 an hour for 15-hour work weeks. The first time I got paid roofing, Johnny handed me the most money I'd ever held in my hand. Tony, Mark, and I spent it like kids working summer jobs, living at home do, on games, clothes, movies, other things we didn't need but felt good spending money on. My brother was saving his money up. I didn't think much about it at the time, but had to have known the reason for Johnny's plan in the first place. My cousins and I enjoyed the extra spending money to burn, but my brother needed this money for bills, for lawyer fees, to get the fuck out of Iowa and on with his life. I think back on the rhythm of his nail gun and hear his desperation in trying to get ahead of his past. Pop, 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 pop. And we were getting ahead at first, getting ahead of schedule, finishing jobs faster than Joe could find them. We were getting paid. Joe even gave us bigger cuts because he was happy with us. You guys are fast. Not like the other teams I got, Joe would say to us each time he got our money out of the bank. Joe would usually have me drive him to these bank runs since he started cracking open bush lights around 8 in the morning. I didn't mind being his chauffeur because that meant getting away from manual labor and closer to cash in my pocket. Those first couple of weeks were simple and as fun as you could get doing manual labor. We worked fast and got paid. Joe mainly stayed out of our way besides sometimes wobbling up a ladder to inspect our work. We all got darker. We started to notice that girls started to notice that we were getting fitter. I hated eating heavy during lunch breaks because that would make the last stretch of the day a slog. So I stuck to salad, chicken, and water. My diet and work put me into one of the best shapes of my life. On a cloudy day in Mount Vernon, Joe came up to us to talk about the last member he wanted to join our team. Cloudy days were tricky because Johnny would be on edge that it might start raining. Then we'd have to tarp over any unshingled areas of the roof and call it a day. A day off was fine for most of us, but the Johnny and meant another day slowed down from finishing a project. Joe walked over to Johnny, smelling of cheap beer. All right, so this is this guy I got coming onto our team, Johnny, Joe said as he walked up. Johnny hid a smirk as he reacted to the our team part of the statement. Oh, yeah? We gonna get somebody that can actually handle a nail gun this time? Johnny replied. Of course, of course. Let me tell you, Johnny, this guy's an illegal, right? And you know me, I don't give two shits whether you're legal or from fucking Mars, as long as you can work. Johnny put down his nail gun and sat on his foam pads to look over at Joe. And this guy, Arturo, he used to work for me, and I tell you, he was the best damn worker I've ever had. Could finish a whole roof off on his own if you give him a day. Johnny laughed. All right then, I'm not gonna argue with that. When's he start? Well, here's the thing. Arturo got tied up in some shit back in Mexico. I don't know what is with you people, but he got himself into a mess and he can't get here. Damn shame too, because I told him there's money to be made. So Arturo is sending his brother to work in his place. And he's good? Johnny asked. If he's half the worker Arturo was, then he'll be good enough for our team, Joe said as he ran his hand through his messy graying hair and blew a snot rocket off the roof. A week later, Arturo's brother Ignacio showed up at our house at 7 in the morning, ready to work. All right, let's see what this Mexican can do, Johnny said to me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sedaget. So my artist statement. You took me somewhere else.
Thank you.
I grew up on the shore of the Caspian Sea in a small town, Turkan, on the Absheron Peninsula near Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. Baku is famous for its oil, but most people probably don't know that Baku is also known as the city of art and culture. The Absheron Peninsula is a small desert-like land known for its grapes, fig trees, and pomegranate trees. There were 8 kids in my family, and each of us had one fig tree in our yard. I remember as a child how impatient I waited for the first figs to ripen and to brag about seeing the first fruit before anyone else. I made friends with one of our pomegranate trees in the yard, and every night when everyone had gone to bed, I would sneak out and talk to my tree to tell her all my troubles. And I believed she always helped me by listening to me and tenderly shaking her branches. As a child, fairy tales and myths fascinated me. My mom used to tell us stories before bed I never found in any book. I learned to read early, and I devoured any book of tales I could find in the library. I grew up hearing ghazal, a form of poetry, and mugham, a type of folk music, which deeply rooted in my soul. There are many, many classical writers and poets who inspired me, as Nizami, Mahsati, Fizuli, Nasimi, Natevan, Shahriyar, Javid. The book of Dada Gorgud is like a holy book. Its story is full of wisdom, always inspired me. I grew up at the crossroads of the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. Two different cultures, two different philosophies, two different visions. I grew up at the crossroads of ancient poetry, music, and folk art, and Soviet realism. On one hand, the beauty of patterns, textiles, color, and desert sands, and on the other hand, jazz, modern art, and European theater. When I came to Iowa, the first thing that amazed me was the great kindness I experienced in people. Iowans welcomed my family and me. They gave us home. I met people here who helped me to find peace, freedom, and myself. Azerbaijan planted a storyteller in me, and Iowa watered and cared for this plant, helping it to grow and bloom. Azerbaijan is the land of miniature art, hand-woven carpets, and stories that sank in my soul and shaped an ancient storyteller in me. Iowa is the land of diverse cultures, great opportunities, and fresh soil for new ideas and creativity that opened a path for that storyteller to reach out to a new world. I'm telling the stories of my ancestors in a new language. Now I'm going to read my story. It's called The Moonchild. Once the world was tall, and she was small. There were millions and millions of people all around her. Millions of feet were busy walking to millions of places, but there weren't enough feet to walk with her. Millions of hands were busy doing millions of things, but there weren't enough hands to stroke her hair. Millions of eyes were busy watching millions of interesting things, but there weren't enough eyes to look at her. Millions of tongues were busy chatting about millions of important things, but there weren't enough tongues to tell her something nice. She was alone. Sometimes she liked to be alone, but most of the time she wished she had somebody. While the millions of bodies lay sleeping at night, she sat on her bed and gazed at the moon, and the moon looked back. She thought to herself that the moon was alone too. One night, while staring at the moon, she heard a smooth and silky voice. The moon was calling her. The moon's voice was like a running water, like a lullaby she had never heard before. Then the moon's rays began falling down to her. They looked like arms, thick and strong, beckoning her to climb them up to the moon who knew her name. Come to me, the moon said to her. The voice was so kind and soothing, but she had a fear in her little heart. Nothing like this had happened to her before. Nobody even lifted her or held her anymore. She looked at the moon, and the peaceful, motherly smile gave her comfort and courage. She stepped on the bright, soft moon rays and began carefully climbing. She climbed, and the moon smiled at her. The moon's smile was big and warm. It smelled like baking bread. Don't be afraid, Moon whispered. I will hold you tight. I will not let you fall. Keep climbing. And the stars, they were waving and giggling all around the moon. Their music sang out, hello, cute one. You have got star eyes like us, and you can fly like us. Yes, yes, do, as the stars say, the moon added, fly instead of climb. She tried, and she flew. She flew and flew. The rays were bright and kind, lifting her ever higher. She visited the moon every night. The moon held her, and they walked all around the sky, jumping on the soft, fluffy clouds. The moon told her funny stories about her star children and silly clouds with her silky voice, and she laughed and laughed. Sometimes the moon rays tickled her feet, making her giggle like stars. She heard her own voice, little, soft, and jingly, and wondered if she had ever heard her own voice before, down there. When she became tired and sleepy, the soft moon rays flew her back, enveloped her bed, and rocked her to sleep. One night, when she was visiting the moon again, there were more dark clouds around her than before, and the stars reminded her of jellyfish she saw under the water when she swam in the sea. She loved the sea. Swimming and jumping over the huge waves always excited her. Now the soft motion of the dark clouds resembled the rolling of the deep, dark sea. She wanted to swim and catch the jellyfish. "Go ahead," the moon whispered in her ear. "What?" She looked at the moon with amazement. "How do you know what I am thinking?" "I just do," smiled the moon. "Now, go on." She looked at the deep, dark sea again. "What if I fall?" she thought to herself, her little heart filled with fear. The moon read her mind again. "You won't. You should never be scared." The moon smiled. "I'm always with you." Soft rays purred against the dark, curled hair. "Trust me, always," the moon whispered gently. The moon's words warmed up her little heart. Her eyes watered from the kindness, and her little arms wrapped around the moon. With one last little hesitation, she looked at the sea and she jumped. She jumped from one cloud to another, chasing the jellyfish, the laughing stars. While swimming through the sky, she felt the moon's long, soft arms around her, around herself, saving her from falling, protecting her from harm. Millions of years passed by. During these years, the moon kept her company while she grew. One day, she heard a different voice calling her. It couldn't be the moon. It wasn't time for the moon. She heard her own voice again when she answered the call, a bit different, somewhat dull, for she was older now. She saw a young man standing in front of her, nervous and shy, asking her hand. Also nervous, she reached out her hand. The man held it gently, and they walked together through a crowd, hearing a voice saying, "I pronounce you man and wife." She understood she would not be alone again. 2 teardrops rolled down her cheeks. She looked at the moon that night, and she was sure there were teardrops in the moon's eyes too. But the moon smiled at her, as always. As years passed, she had millions and millions of children. She became busier with walking, talking, patting, looking, feeding, holding, and kissing. Before bed, she told stories to her children about the moon, about swimming through the sky among the stars. Listening to the stories, the children grew with starry, moonlit dreams. Days weren't always the same. Some days she was overwhelmed and exhausted, lonely and fearful. Sometimes children got sick or hurt, making her sad. At those times, when she felt helpless, she always closed her eyes and listened. And she heard the moon's soft and comforting voice in her heart. "I'm always with you. Trust me." The moon's calming voice and soothing words lifted her heart, brightened her eyes, and brought ease to her day. As they all grew together, it felt as if she were the moon and her children were the stars around her. They would jump and dive, climb and fly, giggling together. Millions of years passed, the children grew taller and moved in different directions. As she got older, she couldn't move fast or do all the things she had done before. She was alone and rested most of the time. One summer night, she stepped outside as she heard a familiar, dear voice calling. The beautiful full moon spread her arms all around, kissing the treetops. Millions of stars were shining brighter than ever. Her face lit up, and she saw that big, warm, milky smile. The moon was calling her to fly again, but she couldn't move anymore. The moon reached out her long arms, wrapped them around her, and lifted her from the ground. And she started flying slowly. She flew in the moonlight. She knew this was her last flight. Her eyes welled up, for she was happy, and the moon was happy too. They hugged each other. She was a moon child, after all. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Palma, and I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa. And I just want to thank everyone for coming here today, and also to let you know that, so October is Filipino American History Month. And if you don't know, this year, 2018, marks over 300 years since the original Spanish colonization of the Philippines, over 150 years since the end of the Spanish-American War, when the Philippines was what became a U.S. colony, and over 50 years since the establishment of ethnic studies in the United States and Asian American studies. And so one thing that I kind of wanted to kind of mark with the reading today was that for a lot of us who came to Iowa, whether with our families or because of jobs, because of opportunities, because of conditions back at home, there's a lot of reasons why people come, but there's also a lot of reasons why people stay. So I just wanted to read a bit from my artist statement about growing up in Iowa. I grew up in the rolling cornfields of the Hawkeye State in Waterloo, Iowa. The people in the community and the city I come from are rooted in histories of displacement. The ancestral lands of the Meskwaki people who suffered the violence of settler colonialism are where my grandparents would visit the casino in Tama. The descendants of the German, Irish, and Norwegian immigrants in the mid-1800s became my parochial and elementary school classmates. The African-American communities who can trace their families' great migration out of the Jim Crow South in the 1920s, and the Bosnian refugees who fled civil war in the 1990s became my high school peers. As an Iowa-raised daughter of Filipino immigrants, the places where I find community are varied and diverse. Despite our extensive history with the United States, Filipino Americans are often grapple with issues of erasure and colonial mentality. Inundated by messages equating assimilation with success, I witnessed how effects of race, class, and language can twist one's fate. It is revealing to call a place home that no one expects you to be from. While most Filipino American history and literature focuses on communities in California and the West Coast, this project serves to document the stories of migration and the many paths we take to call Iowa home. I am honored to participate in the inaugural Bicultural Iowa Writers Fellowship and hope to share a piece of my own family story amongst the rich tapestry of transnational identities in Iowa. My professional training has taught me to become a witness to the human narrative and its deep potential for healing. I dream of broadening the definition of who is an Iowan, what we value, and definitively proving that we are not other people's children, but rather we are the future of the state. And the piece that I wanted to read is called Mi Ultimo Adios, and it was inspired by a trip that I had taken to the Philippines around the time I had graduated from college. And I went to the memorial and tomb site of the Filipino nationalist Jose Rizal. Some people kind of liken him to like the Simon Bolivar of the Philippines. He was a Spanish anti-colonial intellectual who spoke 10 languages, traveled all over the world, and when he came back to the Philippines, he was executed by firing squad. And so in the jail cell in Fort Santiago, where he was held in Manila, the night before his execution, he wrote a poem called Mi Ultimo Adios, and they had it in Tagalog and Spanish and English up for everyone to see. And at that time, I was kind of reflecting, like, I can read this poem in the languages of the colonizers of my parents' home country, but I can't read it in the native language that my parents grew up speaking. And so this poem is a reflection on that. Speak, anak, of unsung heroines, whose compassion imbued Pampanga's fertile riverbanks. Fleeing the Japanese war and the Marcos regime to Hacienda Florencia, where stewards will forevermore profess symbols of love and devotion. Speak, Jesucristo, and share the legacy of inheritance. The seasons passed, and the time came for Libertad to say and offer the novena prayers. With dear mga pamangkin surrounding her, she, her granddaughter, and her daughter were sent forth, traversing oceans and prairies, becoming diaspora, until she too relinquished her own native land. There, her daughter tended to the Americans, in the heartland of the country with no name, now an overseas Filipino worker, curator of remittances. No longer doctora, there she remained, losing her accent. And the granddaughter, matriculated in the halls of the Patina campus, where the defining American was speaking of countless souls and legacy colonialism had silenced. To their implied inquiry, we are here because you were there. Speak, ate. She voices not a lick of the mother tongue, but yet prattles on like a conquistador. When she came of age and coveted her heritage, the parting words of Rizal resounded. Adiós, patria adorada, región del sol querida, perla del mar del oriente, nuestro perdido Edén. But the Castilian farewell meant nothing to ang pamilya. Bahala na, hindi ko po alam. Thank you.
So each of those readings were very different and showed a very different perspective of what each one of their experiences have been here in Iowa. We're going to do a little Q&A now. I just want to check and make sure, do we have until 11:15?
No, we have to the top of the hour.
Top of the hour, okay. So let's, I'm gonna ask one question of the group, and then we're gonna take a couple from the audience. But I wanted each of you to just briefly talk about what decision did you make on how to approach your writing? What did you want to share with the world, with our state, and what conflict did that maybe bring up within you? What obstacles did you see?
I'll try to make this short because we don't have time. I knew that I wanted to really get an accurate representation of my struggles, my family struggles, and things that weren't tied with a good bow, right? I couldn't like accurately represent who we were if we were all like this 100% undamaged model of perfection for people, which I think is kind of in conflict with the idea of, and we've talked about this a lot, like the good immigrant and the other immigrants, right? And you want to be able to be like, no, I'm good, I'm like, I graduated and all those things, but I'm like, if I just did that, it would be really boring, and it wouldn't be real. So I had to make the conscious effort to like, do talk about my brother's drug problems, to talk about how I did. It took me a long time to get through the university by my own volition. So it was a big struggle, and there was a lot of different things that happened with that.
I watched that authenticity, work to come out over the months that we worked together, and just want to say that Chuy's internal struggle with deciding how much to put on the page was beautiful to watch, because at each point when the three of them would have the conversation about how much do we say, or not wanting to distill down or whitewash out any of the truths, it felt like at every corner you chose the path of truth and honesty and authenticity, and I just respected you so much for that part of the process.
Thank you.
Sadagat?
I often ask this question from myself, that why are you telling stories? Why do you want to tell stories? And I have had a very hard childhood, and I believe we live our lives and we go through a lot of different experiences, sometimes hardships, that to tell stories at the end. In the ancient times, the caravans of camel caravans, and people, old and young and children, they were traveling land to deserts to take merchandise and goods and different things to different countries. But when I look at those stories, I believe they mostly spread exchanged stories. So as long, I am the answer to me that as long as one person is listening your story and relates to it, it works to tell a story. So I feel like we all are storytellers. Some of us tell it through words. Some tell us like through songs or through other mediums, other ways. But we all are storytellers. Thank you.
I think that's something that both Chewy and I talked about a lot, being children of immigrants, is that kind of growing up, we didn't really see pieces of ourselves reflected in a lot of the media we consumed, or a lot of anything really in books or TV or anything like that. And so for us to say like, hey, I'm that Filipino girl who's from Iowa writing a book, like that's something, and it's something we wanted to share.
We'd love to answer a few questions that any of you have.
Thank you for sharing such beauty with us on this gloomy day out there. I was just wondering if the authors could talk briefly about their translation processes.
Question was about the
so-
translation process?
Yeah, so for my translation piece, it was actually kind of difficult because we had originally wanted to work, like we have Iowa authors, we want to work with Iowa illustrators, we want to work with Iowa translators, but there really isn't a department of Filipino Tagalog language, culture, and study in in Iowa. There's some on the West Coast, and so we kind of had to, like we say, like grow our own and use our family. So my mother actually reached out to a friend of hers from high school who works as a professional translator, and it was funny. She's like, I don't have her email, but I have her Facebook, so that's how we're going to contact her, and that's how we're going to send the documents.
I originally wrote all my stories in English, and funny thing is, when I tried to translate one of them for the book, I figured out the story sounds awkward, as if I'm not speaking my own language. So I had to send it back to Baku, to my relatives, and to read them through. Do they sound okay? Yeah, it was kind of funny, and I figured out actual translation is a job. You have to, it's one thing you write in one language and then translating it, you are telling different story. Yeah, but I translated by myself. I don't know how good is it.
I actually, in the top of this story that I just read to you, I talk about my struggles with language and Spanish, and I can understand about 80% of what's said by like my family, but I can't speak it, which I think is a very kind of weird thing for people. But it was an odyssey, the translation for my thing. We had a grad student, Nieves, with the University of Iowa, and she agreed to translate it, and right away I kind of danced around the subject with Andrea when Andrea said, like, we have this translator, and I'm like, is she Mexican? She's from Spain, and I was like, oh, there's so much complications in that, and so I met with Nieves, and the first thing that Nieves said was like, I'm really excited to do this. I'm really, really concerned. We need somebody else to be able to like look at this, because it's not even that it's Spanish from Spain versus Spanish from Mexico. It's Spanish from northern Mexico, which is very different from like Spanish in Mexico City, right? And it's not even that, it's Spanish from West Liberty, which like we even have more Spanish, like it's so what we end up doing is we had a friend of mine from West Liberty who's fluent, Sergio, and he worked with Nieves, and they did like translate, and they did so many passes, and I asked Andrea so many times, I'm like, please give us more time, it's so important. I know it's such like, it was such a hairy thing to try to get all the pieces in play, but we ended up, it all worked out really well, and yeah, it was crazy.
One of the cool parts about this book, it's really a resource in so many ways, but each of the fellows created a glossary, and what I love about Chuy's glossary is it has the definitions of like West Liberty Spanish slang. So you're not just getting like definitions of words from Mexico or in Spanish, you're literally getting the Eastern Iowa version of that, which is very cool. Looks like we have another question.
Hi. Thank you for coming and sharing. I'm Bosnian American, and I'm also like a writer, so I was like really interested in seeing what you guys had to say. I actually kind of wrote down my question because I'm not really sure what I'm trying to ask, but like I know like as a first generation American like and as a writer, it's kind of hard to separate like culturally inherited trauma and like pain, like that kind of like comes to define us. So I was wondering, like through your writing, how do you like come to terms or like resolve the pain that has come to define you for so long?
Yeah. I think that for me, part of this journey of writing this book was even finding the resources to access that. So like for me, like I really didn't have any like Filipino American authors who deal with identity of like biculturalism until like right before this book came out. There actually is now like like Elaine Castillo published America is Not the Heart, which is a riff off of Carlos Bulosan's America is in the Heart. So these are all like it's almost becoming like I had to search and find like the Carlos Bulosans of the world that I could read. I had to search out and find the Jessica Hagedorns of the world that I could read. I had to like find my own Filipino American or Filipino American studies literature that I never really had an opportunity to take or learn, and I kind of constructed that world for myself just through like the internet and finding like the American Writers Workshop or Kundiman or all these other like literary spaces that occur on the internet or literary spaces that occur in other spaces, but they are sharing their resources with people who, whether by distance, geography, or language, can access those things. And so by kind of immersing myself and hearing those conversations, I could, because I didn't have access to those conversations myself, like growing up, I grew around a Filipino community, but I didn't grow up around Filipino peers. And so for me, like those conversations that you would have with those peers about shared cultural identity or shared like intergenerational trauma or cultural trauma, they were things that I kind of had to absorb through my own interest and through my own like trying to find those things before I could even grapple with them myself. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but in a way it's like I had to teach myself about it first before I could even figure out where I fit into that entire conversation.
That was a wonderful question, and I think it leads into kind of our wrap-up, which is we are open for applications for next year's fellows. And being Bosnian American, we'd love to have you apply if writing is part of your world. And to all of you here in the audience, if you have someone in your life who is an immigrant for second generation, we just really encourage you to share this program and encourage those people to apply. I think we've started something beautiful here, and it's going to continue. The book is available at Merge. We'll be just right over there. Our fellows will be here. We'd love to talk to you more about this project. They'll be signing books and just spending some time together. Thank you for spending this hour with us.